Today I'm going to be finishing with chapter 7 from Profiting from the Path of Most Resistance, written by Pastor James Gill. And I do have permission from his wife, Dolores Fields, to share this book with you. Chapter 7. Overcoming confusion about God's goodness and life's unfairness. My re-energized love for God didn't heal my eyes. The muscle fatigue and frequent pain behind my eyes persisted. It was like walking a very narrow lane on top of a mountain peak. The sides of the mountain sloped precipitously on either side of the lane. The slightest overuse of my eyes threw me down the slope into mind-numbing fatigue and pain. Only bed rest revived me. My friend named Habakkuk. The early morning coffee tasted great as I sat in our den and began listening to a cassette recording of an Old Testament book named Habakkuk. Although darkness enfolded the day outside, God was about to shine new light into my understanding. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you, violent, but you do not save, the prophet complained. That sounds like me. In earlier times, I thought. Chapter 1, verse 3 also captured my attention. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. I remember times when I asked God why he did this or didn't do that. The book of Habakkuk had never affected me like it did that morning. It seemed to me that Habakkuk reflected many of my earlier struggles. One moment the prophet described God as good. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. The next moment he questioned God's justice. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Like Habakkuk, I regarded God as good, but also unfair. My friend Habakkuk lived 600 years before Jesus, but his words brought life to me in 1995. During the next few months, the seed thought planted in my mind by the book of Habakkuk led me into a new understanding about God's goodness and life's unfairness. God can't create unfairness. I respected God as a good, supreme creator. I reasoned that since everything exists by God's permission or creative ability, he made unfairness. This is Bagheera. He likes to look at himself on camera, and he loves to sit here while I'm reading. He thinks that when he hears me talking, that he has to be here. But we work with what we've got, right? I'll start again on that. God can't create unfairness. I respected God as a good supreme creator. I reasoned that since everything exists by God's permission or creative ability, he made unfairness. Where else did unfairness come from? God is the creator. So he is the origin of everything, including unfairness. One day it came to me that God placed creative abilities in humans. Genesis 2:15 points out that God made the Garden of Eden and the man. The Lord placed the man in the garden to work it and take care of it. He gave the man an indigenous mind capable of generating ideas to beautify his home on earth. God took the man as his partner in creative work. As I pondered God's act of sharing his creativity with mankind, a new idea sprang to life in my thoughts. As long as Adam and Eve submitted to God, they brought forth the beautiful, the good, the beneficial, and the pleasant. When they rebelled against him, the first couple created unfairness. I realized that the unfairness came from man's mind, not the mind of the Lord. Unfairness was a human invention, not a divine creation. Adam and Eve treacherously abused the creativity God placed within them and gave birth to unfairness. True, we can say that God permitted the devil to tempt Adam and Eve and allowed them to rebel against him. But God did not cause unfairness to spring into being. Permitting unfairness is not the same as creating it. Also, I saw that Cain rejected God's regulations on human behavior. Unrestrained by God's directives, Cain murdered. He murdered Abel. How unfair. A godly man destroyed by his godless brother. Who's to blame for this act of unfairness? God or Cain? Obviously, God did not inspire Cain to kill Abel. Cain's God rejecting heart perpetrated this horrible unfairness. My unconditional love for God prevented me from any longer blaming him for things I could not understand. In fact, love for God replaces our blame against God with trust in him. Unconditional love for God enlarges our capacity to understand him. This new understanding of the origin of unfairness freed me from the slightest tendency to blame God for my physical disability that he chose not to heal, placing the blame where it belongs. Okay, God doesn't generate unfairness. I admit it. But where does it come from? Should my love for God deny its existence? Does faith in God simply ignore the reality of inequality? Such thoughts followed on the heels of my admission that God can't create unfairness. Once again, the Holy Spirit used the prophet Habakkuk to help me win my mental wrestling match against confusion. As I read Habakkuk 3:17, I saw that the prophet freely admitted that life is unfair. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, it's unfair when farmers plant fields that produce no crops. It's not right when sheep herders and cattle ranchers invest their lives and finances in the animals that die of disease. Unfairness strikes both the righteous and the unrighteous, the godly and godless. Like the gaseous atmosphere that envelops planet Earth, unfairness is all around us. My thoughts told me that unfairness surrounds the earth because humans sinned against God. Does this mean that every sin brings forth another incident of unfairness? Did my ancestors' sins cause me to be born with scarred macula? No, we didn't attempt attaching unfairness to specific acts of sin. Unfairness is here and randomly affects all of us. I must place the blame for unfairness on life and not on God, I decided. What new peace of mind flooded me. I found it easy to agree with the statement in Revelation 15:3. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages. In all that has happened to us, you have been just. You have acted faithfully, filled me with contentment with the way God had treated me. The cleansing of my feelings. Okay, that is the last time that you will do that. Go over there. Go over there. I apologize for that. It's like a child that wants attention. The cleansing of my feelings. During my years of walking the path of most resistance, I battled many unpleasant feelings about God. In my thoughts, I accepted His word as reliable and trustworthy, but my heart accused Him of not treating me right. I often loved God logically, with my intellect, while unruly agitation gripped the other part of me. My head insisted that God loved me, while simultaneously my heart said He didn't. I didn't want these unpleasant feelings about God. I didn't like them. Nevertheless, occasional inner battles raged within me when life subjected me to tough times. It was like there were two of me, one part wanting to believe God, while the other part wanted nothing to do with Him or His will. These reoccurring battles disgusted me and filled me with disappointment in myself. God watched me battle against these unhealthy feelings. He didn't forsake me or disown me. He wasn't ashamed to call me His child. He felt my hurt and cared about my plight. That's why He left me on the path of most resistance. Feelings have a way of hiding themselves deep within us, but life's pressures, struggles, and hardships force them to the surface. So my disappointment and unanswered prayer brought my feelings to my awareness. Without the path of most resistance, these feelings would have remained hidden deep in my person. Love for God would have ruled my head, but not all of my heart. God was ready to take me another step toward the cleansing of my feelings about Him. Tropical heat enfolded me as I stepped out of our house in Corpus Christi one morning in June 1995. A typical southeasterly wind off the Gulf of Mexico drove fluffy white clouds across the blue sky. Following a 5 or 6 minute ride to the professional building in which our church met, I stepped out of the humidity into my air conditioned office. I began preparing my sermon outline for the upcoming Sunday service. Many of my observations about the prophet Habakkuk's reaction to unanswered prayer congealed in my thoughts. The Habakkuk of chapter 1 poured out his exasperation with God's inaction in Israel's behalf. The prophet had called and called upon the Lord to save Israel from Babylonian invasion and subsequent destruction, but God did nothing. Now, in chapter 2, verse 20, the prophet acknowledged God's supremacy by proclaiming that the Lord is in His holy temple. He followed this proclamation with a command: let all the earth be silent before Him. Silence? I questioned. This guy went from violent words about the Lord to placid submission to His will. Habakkuk's outburst against God changed to loving silence before God. Habakkuk was neither resigning himself to hopelessness nor merely squelching his unpleasant feelings about the Lord. In chapter 3 of this book, I saw a man cleansed of harsh feelings about God. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior, describes the feelings of the same man who previously loved God but didn't feel good about Him. It was like the Habakkuk of chapter 1 was a different man in chapter 3. He was different. He loved God with all his head and with all his heart feelings. As I sat in my office located in the Padre Palm Square professional building, new assurance in both God and myself flooded me. If Habakkuk's feelings about God can change for the better, so can mine. I determined. In my imagination, I envisioned a formula scrawled on a classroom board. For God plus path of most resistance equaled cleansed feelings about Him. Confidence in God's conditional goodness removes our worry about life's unfairness. Then we reap profit from walking the path of most resistance. Epilogue. Giving over, not giving up. Although I've used many biographical recollections in profiting from the path of most resistance, this book is really not about me. It's about the Jesus who decided to bring us into the world and direct our steps during our time on this planet. We serve as the work of his hands for the display of his splendor. So I trust the narrative recorded in this book intensifies your appreciation of God's unique work for you. We are in the year 2005, and God has chosen to not heal my eyes. The blind spots in my eyes are much larger, and retina specialists cannot eliminate the scars on my macula. For many years, I have not been able to use my left eye. It enjoys peripheral vision that's 20/400 when I wear my glasses. I depend exclusively on my right eye, but the scar has enlarged during the last few years. Consequently, I notice the blind spots several times a day. For example, I look at my desk for my pen or micro cassette recorder, and they just aren't where I left them. I turn my head slightly, and like magic, they appear. I know these items are where I left them, but I have to turn my head to one side or the other in order to see around the blind spot. James, have you given up on healing for your eyes? A pastor questioned me one day in 2002. Without a moment's hesitation, I replied to my friend, no, I haven't given up. I've given over my eyes to God's care. As a young man, I pursued the goal of divine healing. The path of most resistance forced me to change my goal. My goal became an intimate relationship with Jesus. As a result, his presence floods my mind and emotions with complete confidence that he only desires the supreme best for me. Expectation for the best fills me with joyful anticipation of better than the best and more than the most. How great is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, which you bestow in the sight of men on those who take refuge in you. Guaranteed healing awaits everyone who refuses to give up on Jesus and gives themselves over to his skillful handling of their lives. God's promises give us innumerable reasons for expecting victory. His word offers us no reason to look for the worst to happen. His presence brings healing to our relationship with him. Sometimes his presence brings healing to our bodies, our relationships, or our finances, but not always. When he doesn't heal our bodies, relationships, or finances, we can rest assured that he's going to use lack of healing in our favor. In 1997, Dolores and I launched Comfort and Encouragement Ministries. We wanted to use our experiences on the path of most resistance to help others flourish during their trials and difficulties. For 7 years, God has sustained us professionally and financially. We have preached in many churches, held seminars in others, and spent lots of time strengthening the hands of pastors and missionaries. We can help people because we have reaped profit from the path of most resistance. You also will profit from your path of most resistance. That ends the reading of this book. Again, this is Pastor James Field's book, Profiting from the Path of Most Resistance. In this book, there are lots of scriptures, and it can be used as an in-depth Bible study. So if anybody is looking for a resource for a Bible study, I would suggest getting this book. You can order it on Amazon. And I thank you for joining me for this. And just remember that God is so good. Stand on his promises and trust him in all that you do. Choose to walk by faith and not by sight. even if you don't receive the answers that you think you should. He always has a plan, He always has a purpose. God bless you.